Okay, so welcome. This is Viv's short course on web accessibility for front-end developers. I'm Viv, and what we're going to cover today is we're going to discuss our users, the WCAG guidelines, which stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So what they are, most common failures, and how to test any site using Axe tools. What we were doing about accessibility at Matillion, and testing for accessibility with Cypress Axe, and then the latest releases with Chrome DevTools in terms of all things accessibility, and lastly, how to be an accessibility advocate. So before we get started, just a little bit about me. My name is Viv, my pronouns are she, her. I am a front-end developer and an accessibility advocate at Matillion, and my background is in computer science, education, and design, so I hope that this will bring a unique perspective on the subject. So as a teacher, it is our job to deliver the curriculum in the most effective way possible so that our students can digest the content that we give them. There are many different types of learners, ranging from visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And it is our job to make sure that everyone can digest that information in the correct way. So we talk about learners here, and whether they are part of special educational needs or not. But there's also people from different backgrounds that we have to consider. So from my design background, I did some research on all things gender identity, where I interviewed different people around Ireland who didn't identify as a traditional male or female. And the purpose of this book really was to communicate with audiences who didn't understand the concept of gender identity, what that is, so that they can connect more to personal accounts by people who they may not know, but who have recorded their experience here. So here is a Venn diagram of all things accessibility and inclusive design, and their similarities. And so on the left, we have accessibility and inclusive design on the right. And I just want to point out the differences between the two. So accessibility is mainly specified for people who have a physical or cognitive disability, whereas inclusive design is more for every type of person. Accessibility has laws and regulations and guidelines that people have to abide to, whereas inclusive design is a more holistic approach to the topic. So these are both areas I'm very interested in, and if you have any interest in inclusive design, come talk to me after, but this talk is mainly going to focus on web accessibility. So at Matillion, 5 out of our 6 core values cover accessibility advocacy. We have our main one here, which is we care about our people and our communities. Alright, so we've talked about different users ranging from our students, ranging from different types of learning abilities and backgrounds, but how do our users consume and navigate our content, and who are those users? So it is important to know that 1.3 billion people across the world live with some form of disability, and Microsoft have released a really beautiful graphic here to kind of showcase all the different types of disabilities, whether they are permanent, temporary, or situational, and the category that they come under. And so here we are all on the spectrum, whether maybe not right now, but maybe at another point in our lives. And as it indeed says, we are all just temporarily disabled. So whether you have a permanent disability, you are born with, say, one arm, or you are temporarily disabled, you've been in an accident and you've broken your arm, or situational. So you might not even know what situational disability is, in terms of it could be, so you have a baby in your hand. In my case, so it could be where I am baking in my kitchen and I don't want to touch my phone because I have flour or whatever all over my hands. So I'm going to show you a video on what CJ Gannon created. He is a creative developer at Adobe, and how he has made assistive technology, or an app where assistive technology can be used to interact with your app. He uses a screen reader and gesture input in order to interact. So I'll show that next slide.
So because this is a recipe application, most of the time people are going to have their hands busy or dirty while they're actually using it. So we wanted to create a way that you could navigate the application without actually having to touch your computer and get it dirty. So what we did was implemented voice navigation. And let me show you how this works. You can actually click this little button down here and watch as I talk into the application, it'll actually navigate between sections. Go to cupcakes. Vanilla cupcakes. Recipe. So you can see how that creates the ability for us to navigate the application without ever having to touch our computer. We can also make use of other hardware, like the Leap Motion device, which allows us to use gestural input when navigating our computer. So I can just input the device, and it instantly recognizes it. And we're using CSS regions to break up our content into different slides, but instead of having to touch the device to navigate, we're actually using the Leap Motion, so you can use gestures to actually swipe through the content and continue cooking.
All right, that was it. That's what I want to share for that side. All right, so in order to build more inclusive experiences, we need to make sure that out of the box, our assistive technology can interact straight away with our application. In order to do that, we need to make sure that our apps are fully compliant with the guidelines that are available to us. So these guidelines are called the WCAG guidelines, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They are broken up into 4 main principles. So perceivable, for example, if there was an audio or a video on a screen, if I was a non-sighted user or I was part of the deaf community, that content is not accessible for me as a user. And operable means that if I am a non-mouse user, it is important that I'm able to click tab on a keyboard so that I can access every component on the page. Understandable means that all information on the page is in the correct language. So for example, a button describes exactly what that button will do. And then robust is very important, where you can actually, the assistive technology can interpret what you're trying to say in the code that you've written. So at Matillion, we are level AA, the WCAG guidelines are broken up into 3 levels of conformance. So we have level A, AA, and AAA. At Matillion, we are AA, and then if you are, so the absolute minimum is A, and then for banks or governmental website, we have AAA. So what happens if we don't abide by these guidelines, or we are a user that is trying to interact with a certain site? So this is a very common case study that a lot of people in accessibility often reference, which is where a man called Guillermo, who was a blind user, tried to just order a simple Domino's pizza on the app or the website, and he couldn't do so. So he sued Domino's, and he won the court case, which was an absolute win for the disability community. So I just want to ask a question to everyone here who has a product or a site. How accessible do you think your website is? You don't have to answer. Okay, but there was a WebAIM report released every year, but for the past 4 years, 98% of top website homepages were non-accessible and failed WCAG guidelines. So have you ever been on a page where you can't interact with the button, you don't know what it does, when you press on a link, it doesn't bring you to the right link, or the classic one where you're filling out a form and you start to go back in the form process, and then somehow it all just reloads and you need to start the form again. So it's actually more common than you think how often this happens across websites. And there are people who are monitoring this. There are laws and regulations that are actually built into the government that is there for people who are looking out for them. Okay, but this isn't just in technology. This is also employment. This is also transportation. So, as developers, regardless of the framework that you're working in, or whether that's Vue, Angular, or React, these are the React documentation, and it says here that we have access to make our sites accessible. So accessibility is built into the browser, so it's our responsibility, not just the government's, to make sure that our sites are accessible. So from our React code, where does that go? This is a diagram that illustrates the full process of how we get to our user. So from React, we go into our raw HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's in the DOM tree. The accessibility tree is then derived from the DOM tree, and then it is translated for assistive technology to interact with the user. The user performs an action, and then that's the input, and then so on. So how do we make sure our accessibility tree is working correctly? Right. So next, we'll start looking more into this, but we're on to the next part that says how to test any site for accessibility in accordance with the WCAG guidelines. So what site do we all use when we first want to look up and find out about something? I've chosen Wikipedia. So, this is the next slide. Okay, so to test our tools, we have Axe DevTools and Google Lighthouse. And these are two libraries that we can use to test our products. We've already discussed the importance of making a positive user experience, and we've also talked about lawsuits. What makes Axe stand out is that it prevents false positives. In order to get set up with Axe, we can just go onto the Chrome DevTools library and download that, and it updates in our browser, and then we have that available to us. The thing I want to point out here as well with the Lighthouse and DevTools is that different reports produce different outcomes. And Axe is, you'll see, it is more superior than Lighthouse. We just want to point that out for now. So this is what I was talking about before, where I looked up dog on Wikipedia. And I do want to ask you guys, how accessible do you think this website is? We're going to scan it and analyze it, and then it's going to give us a specific score. So, has anyone ever used Axe? Can I ask how accessible do you think it would be? You actually have to answer this. Dylan? Oh yeah, you go ahead. Did you say single A? Okay, so level A implies that 26% or 26 checkboxes are accessible for it. So, which is quite a lot. So, not exactly, but so I'll move on to the next slide and you'll see the score for this page. So it is 488 violations on this page for accessibility, which is massive. So just want to go through what the scoring for this actually means. So it's actually a bit small right there, but I have it up on the top right and had it broken down. So they're broken down into critical, serious, moderate, and minor as part of the scoring. So critical means that it's completely blocked, the content is completely blocked, inaccessible for our users with disabilities. We have serious, where it's partially blocked, moderate, where it is sort of, and then minor, you can say it's like a club. So the first, when you click on the scoring, you can see up top, it talks about color contrast. Which is kind of more so a UX issue, and you have a pile of different tools online that you can use to combat this. We're actually going to go down to the bottom one, which looks at links. So to do that, I'm just going to say, how do we solve the issue? So the issue being links need to have let me just read this out, links must have discernible text. Okay? So what we do to use the Axe DevTools is we would press on the highlight feature, which highlights where on the page we're actually having this issue. Then in the guidelines, it also will tell us how to solve this issue. And if we need more information, we can go on top, and there's a button that says more information, and that brings us to the DQ documentation. And so this is all the further guidelines here. So what it gives us is an exact example of how to solve the issue. On the far right, it tells us what users are affected, the success criteria that it violates, and what laws matches up with this, or what success criteria matches up with this law under section 508. So we're going to continue solving the issue. We have our code up on top that says how to do it, which is all we have to do is add an ARIA label. So we can inspect that in the DOM and just add an ARIA label there, and then we reload, the Axe DevTools, and then it goes from 20 down to 19, or 25 to 24 in the serious issue section. So let me leave that up so you guys can see. So I ran the same tool, or the same page with Google Lighthouse, which is the competitor I discussed earlier on, and added the ARIA label, and as you can see, there's actually been no changes for inaccessibility in the scoring. Maybe you can't see it that well here, but it says from 80 to 80. So this just shows that Axe DevTools is the more superior one, given that it gave us 488, and it's saying here that this is 80% accessible. So how does this affect Matillion, and what is the next step here? So far I've shown you guys how to debug for accessibility using Axe DevTools. And here what we want to do is shift left through the power of automation by testing as we build. So I'm on the Platform UI team, which is a centralized team across Matillion. We built out the component library where all products use this and pull from our repo. So it's really important for us that we make sure our components are as accessible and are built really, really well. So the component that I'm going to focus on here is the Checkbox component. So we use Storybook. This is made with Storybook, which allows us to test components in isolation and build components too. And this is Checkbox Stories. So very straightforward. We have a custom-made label component, and we have a custom-made checkbox component here. And then we pass our arguments through, and then up on top is the what the visual of that looks like. All right. So in order to test for that component, we're going to build a Cypress test. A Cypress is a beautiful library that allows for end-to-end testing. So up on top, we have the same component that we made in our stories file, and then underneath that we have our Cypress test. So we'll go into a bit more detail about what that does. So the mount component injects ax4 into the page using the inject ax function. And then we have the check for violations function that runs ax to verify accessibility. So this isn't always very straightforward in how we got this set up. We needed helper functions to customize it so that we can make sure that it is doing what we want to do. So for example, we have a whitelist so that we can only get feedback on issues we care about, because ax tests the whole page, or ax tests the whole page rather than just the component we want to work on. So what does this look like when we're just looking at the ax dev tools locally and in our code? So we discussed earlier about the scoring criteria, where we have critical, serious, moderate, and minor. And here we have included critical, severe, and moderate. So just to go over, we've added helper functions so that we can test for critical, and then similar to, so I've gone through some of that. So I'll just do that for a second. All right, and then this is the Cypress Dashboard. That is the results of the report. And as you can see, we have those 3 little violations, but the reason for that is because it isn't, it's out of scope for our component. So again, I've run ax dev tools on this component manually, and I've also done the same with Google Lighthouse. And above you can see that there's 3 violations, whereas it's saying 100% accessible with Google Lighthouse. So next, I want to go into a bit more detail about what the accessibility tree is, because a lot of devs don't know that it actually exists already in our Chrome DevTools. So just to go over this diagram again, we have our React, we have our raw HTML CSS. It is derived from the accessibility tree, and then it's translated for our assistive technology translates it, and then it's given to our user. The user performs an action, and then the service an input. So this is what the accessibility pane looks like, and this is where you can find the accessibility tree. So originally what you could do is you can press each component in your elements section in the console, and it will update to the right of your accessibility tree the name, which is what this screen reader would read out, and it also the role, so for example checkbox, and then it would also outline the state, which would be checked or unchecked. So this is a new feature that's just came out this year, absolutely beautiful, and it allows you to scan the whole page, and then it allows you to toggle to and from using this little map right here. And yeah, this is just something I really wanted to share with everyone, because a lot of people don't really know about it. It's still brand new, this feature. So that's about it, but it allows you to see what the screen reader would read out if you were to use it. So just to recap, we talked about our users, the WCAG guidelines, how to test sites with ax dev tools, what we were doing about accessibility at Matillion, testing for accessibility with Cypress ax, and the latest releases with Chrome DevTools. And lastly, a call to action, how you can be an accessibility advocate at your company. So you can do presentations like this. Global Accessibility Day is on the 19th of May next month. We have International Day of People with Disabilities, which is on the 3rd of December. And there is the biggest app conference, our accessibility conference of the year, called AXCon. Went this year, absolutely incredible. And you can hashtag on Twitter, you can write blogs, and you can also sign up for the Accessibility Mentor Program. So that's it. Thank you guys for bearing with me.